The book, Listening to the Deep Song, is a blend of poetry and prose, and it's about my interests in various Spanish-related themes. It's about my interest in the work and life of the Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca. It's about my interest in learning the Spanish language and in learning flamenco dance, and it's also about my impressions of Spain, having visited there 3 times in 2006, 2014 and 2019. I started learning Spanish in Hobart in 1997. Perhaps I first heard about him there. Later, I bought the book of his selected poems published by Penguin in 1997 and began reading him in English and Spanish. And from there, my interest continued to grow. The first poem in the book, Learning to Spell, was written in honour of his life, and that was published in 2008. And I kept reading more of Lorca's work, his plays as well as his poetry, and other people's responses to it. Of course, he's a very, very famous poet around the world, and many people have written about him or created artistic works in response to his work and life. You could say his status is iconic in a way. He was precociously talented. He was a musician, a poet, and a visual artist. So why am I drawn to his life and work? I've asked myself that many times, and I thought that perhaps one of the things was that he seemed in sympathy with my own interests, even though he lived his adult life at the beginning of the 20th century in a faraway country, and I found that very interesting. For example, he loved nature and wrote a lot about it and expressed an almost mystical sense of the natural world and how humans interact with it. Another thing that I found very interesting about him was that along with the composer Manuel de Falla, Lorca championed the flamenco arts and the traditional songs known as cante hondo or deep song from Andalusia in the south of Spain. And he did this at a time when flamenco was considered by the establishment to be an art form of the lower classes, so the Gypsy or Romani people, and was looked down upon them. It was looked down upon by the affluent classes in Spain, and there are still some people in Spain of the establishment classes that hold that attitude, some of the older people. So he championed this marginalised art form at a time when it was really not taken seriously at all. He and Manuel de Falla both did. When he was a student, Lorca and his fellow students from the Madrid University took theatre to the rural poor in Spain, and on the back of a truck they used to drive around to all the villages and present theatrical performances to the people that would normally not get any kind of cultural opportunities like that. And so he had an interest in what we now call social justice issues, including the oppressive restrictions placed on women's roles at the time. And some of his plays are particularly about that. And I found that interesting too. He himself came from an educated, well-off family, but his parents were what we would say progressive people. He struggled with his homosexuality when Spain was becoming dangerously right-wing in the early part of the 20th century, and the Catholic Church had such a huge, heavy influence over all aspects of Spanish life. And then I guess his death at the hands of the fascists in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War meant he became like a martyr to the left and a symbol of what is at stake when political extremists gain power. The interesting thing is Lorca never regarded himself as political in this sense and never wanted to be a martyr. In fact, my understanding of what happened around the events of his death gave me the impression that he remained somewhat politically naive right to the very end, because he didn't really think he was in danger even when they were after him. So he became a sort of potent political symbol around the world, and I wouldn't say this symbolism inspires me, but it interests me, and it's a reminder of the kind of thing that can still happen today, and why we still, for example, need organisations like PEN, So what happened to Lorca as a poet in the context of the Spanish Civil War still happens to other writers in a variety of places around the world. So I suppose for all those reasons, I've found his work interesting. His poetry, he uses a lot of very dense metaphors in his poetry, and I find that fascinating because I don't use metaphors, or certainly not very dense ones in my poetry. So I sort of find it interesting to see how he does that. But also, as I've been learning Spanish, I've been also noticing the different kinds of translations of Lorca's poems, and which ones I feel are sort of closer to perhaps what he originally was trying to express. So, learning to spell after the life of Federico Garcia Lorca. The boy learns to spell leaf. It turns to leaves on a yellow tree. Leaf through the mistake of years, a complicated task, a lot of rubbing out. There's knife and shelf, the rules the same, do your homework. By mistake the evening, a knife-edge wind cuts the leaves. The alarm, the shelves full of books, the guards are spellbound. The boy changes into a bird, watches through mist on the panes, writes sentences with the word leaf, a complicated task, a lot of rubbing out. They leaf through the shelves. After the wind, there was only one leaf left. On the page, a trail of tears, the stanzas stretched out. There is something about Spain when I am there that feels very, very familiar to me, and I don't know what it is, but it's kind of like I feel at home in it, and that doesn't necessarily mean I love everything about it, but because there's things about it, Spanish culture, that I don't like, but it all feels familiar somehow. And the funny thing is that each time I've been there, when I've just been out in the street or something like that, I have often been mistaken for a local, because people come up to me and ask me for directions, but then as soon as I open my mouth and try to say something, they know I'm not a local and they get a real shock. So I find that I've had that experience each time I've been there, and I find that kind of interesting, strange. When I'm there, I like to immerse myself totally in the language, and so obviously the more you're there speaking and listening to it every day, your language levels get up again, and So I enjoy that, and again, even though my Spanish is by no means perfect, I feel at home in the language, and I don't know exactly why, because I only started learning it in 1997. It's not like I've grown up bilingual or anything like that. The other thing about Spain is I'm really drawn to the music from the south, flamenco music. Why? I don't know, but it pulls at me, when I hear it, and I've always had that response to it. Even before I went there, there was something about it that just got me right here, and, I wanted to go to the place where it came from to see what that was all about. And I haven't fully answered those questions. If I lived closer to Spain, I imagine I would go there often. But being in Australia, it's a much bigger effort to do that. And I'm not sure if I will return, but yeah. So the sort of day-to-day life I find really suits me too, the way the Spanish break up their days into work times and rest times, and then and the way things don't all stop at 6 o'clock in the evening. Life goes on. It doesn't matter whether it's a Monday or a Tuesday or a Saturday, and I like that much more integrated feeling of work and leisure, I suppose. That it's and the Spanish are great. They love conversation, and so all that sort of day-to-day feeling that you pick up when you're there, I really, really like. I mean, when I go there, I always notice how much the Spanish talk. And then when I leave, after being there for a long time, I notice how much we, with our English heritage, are so quiet, And I guess sometimes I want more of one type of atmosphere, and at other times I want more of the other. So it plays with my sense of myself, I suppose, yeah. In Gaudi Wonderland. Inside the Casa Batlló, the building seems to sway and dance and smile, and I want to leap about as the curves of my breasts and hips align with the curves of the cave-like walls, ceilings, archways, and the stairs sweeping upwards into an underwater blue well of light. This architecture celebrates nature's shapes and patterns, crafted in stone, wood, glass, and clay, the bejewelled facade like water lilies in a lake, the ceiling rose as if made of soft wax, and the curl of golden pink flower around the staircase newel. I imagine living here in this building that honours a sense of joy, feel gracious and light, tender, seductive, playful, free of straight lines and rigid postures, as if some essential fluidity has reawoken deep inside me. On top, outside in the midday sunshine, I stand by the roofline, a mosaic dragon's back, near a bulbous-shaped tower and a choir of chirpy ceramic chimney pots that look as if they might break into song. I wonder if all this is not some kind of magic, and if I could not just as easily climb the dragon's back and fly happily away.